So thank you for being with us here at our first of what we hope will be many opportunities to discuss the state of literacy education in Washington State. We have um, several of our literacy faculty from preparation programs around the state who are joining us to have a discussion about the science of reading, emerging patterns in the field, best practices for literacy education, and then talk about what kind of policy implications that we might have. We would like to begin with a land acknowledgement. We'd like to acknowledge that no matter where each of us are physically, we are on the traditional land of Native Americans whose ancestors were the original inhabitants. As we proceed with our work, let's make sure that our deliberations and recommendations benefit their descendants equitably. And if you have the opportunity, I know many of us are accustomed to putting to naming the tribal lands that we are on in the chat. I hope that you all have an opportunity to go further than that. One of the things that our agency has done is had the opportunity to, our offices are on the Squaxin Island tribal land. And so we have made a concerted effort to build relationships with that tribe, to build relationships with the Yakima tribe, and we're currently working to build more relationships with the Spokane tribe as we begin to have our board meetings there later this month. So we hope that our land acknowledgement is more than just acknowledgement of the land, but respect of the people and the beginning of relationships. And if you have an opportunity to do that, we would love for you to join us in that. Our other ritual and tradition that we do at the beginning of our meetings is a moment of silence. We would like to acknowledge the history of this nation, one fraught with contradictions. For too long, this country has elevated a story of democracy and freedom while minimizing the impact of violence and oppression on marginalized communities on whose backs this nation was built. Today, members of our Black and Asian communities and other communities of color continue to experience racism through police brutality, mass incarceration, inequitable education and health services, deportation, and other forms of subjugation. We aim to disrupt the legacy of systemic racism by centering racial equity and justice in our work. This is how we stand with our communities of color. Before we begin, we want to offer a moment of silence to consider these words and how you might join us in this work. This moment of silence is important for us, not just because of the state of the world, but because we are talking about the state of literacy education and when we don't teach students to be literate in a way that honors them when they are in grade school, they are more likely to end up in the school to prison pipeline. So it's definitely important to literacy instruction to understand the history of harm and the history of help that school has done in helping folks build systems that support students' learning. So I see there are some questions in the chat. Oh, thank you for folks who are doing that. So we want to give some gratitude before we jump into the work. Today, we know right now there are 89 people on this call. There were about 170 that signed up, so they may be showing up at different points in time. but we know that many of you represent Washington educators, students, and families. We have legislative members and staff. We have PESB partners and stakeholders, and there are also PESB and Pair Board members and the PESB staff. So to let people know who's in the meeting, please feel free to type your name and introduce yourself in the chat. So I see faculty, I see teachers, I see state education agencies, I see legislative staff, folks from ESDs.
Erica,
Yes.
as people are posting there in the chat, some are only coming to their introductions, only coming to us, the panelists, and some are going to everyone. So they probably need to change.
Yes. So there's a little button when on your chat that lets you decide if you want to send a message directly to the hosts or if you want to send it to everyone. So if you get a chance, select everyone so that everyone gets to know who's here. So very exciting. Let's keep those names coming. We appreciate you coming to be a part of witness this dialogue amongst our faculty. So with that, I'd like to begin with a welcome. I am Dr. Erica Hernandez Scott. I'm the Executive Director of PESB. And two questions really motivated me to reach out to faculty to begin what I hope to be a long-term discussion amongst all of us as partners and stakeholders. My first question is, are we really failing in elementary literacy? And if you had a chance to read my response to a report by the National Council of Teacher Quality, I disagree. I disagree that we are failing in elementary literacy. And one way that I determined that to be the answer to that question to be no was by immediately gathering and talking with elementary literacy faculty. And instead of me speaking for them, I invited them to join me here today in order to tell you what they're doing. My other question is, are we ready for the future? We've had many conversations about the nature of research and how time can move so quickly, and research changes can sometimes change overnight, and sometimes it stays the same but changes its name overnight. And so I believe that with this group of people who are here and excited and experts in their field, that we can answer many of these questions that folks are wondering about with literacy in Washington State. Are we failing? I welcome you to this meeting by saying, absolutely not. Are we ready for the future? We are headed there. And there are things that we can do together as a community to help. So today, here are a number of folks, and there's a few who aren't named here, but when all of our interest around the science of reading took hold of, what was happening out there in the world, I immediately called on WACD, which is the Washington Association of Colleges for Teacher Education. And I asked the group, please nominate your leaders in literacy who would be willing to come talk to me about what is happening inside preparation programs. And here are the names of several of them who you'll meet today, and a few others who contributed but maybe were not able to meet and be on the call today. But we have Sharon Walker from Central Washington University, Bethany Moffitt from CityU, Lisa Laurier from Whitworth, Matthew Miller from Western Washington, Margaret Vaughn from Washington State, Tara from Eastern Washington, Ann Van Wig from Eastern Washington, Belinda Louie from UW-Tacoma, Jane Kelly from Washington State, and then Allison is from the University of Puget Sound. So we have north, south, east, west, public, and private represented here today, as they have a lot of information to share. So for our first section, we have is about the science of reading. What is it? How is it different than what came before? And so for this first section, we're going to have small groups of faculty share a little bit of information, and then talk as a panel for some discussion around that, and then move on to another section. So with that, I will pass this off to our first group of faculty.
All right. Thank you, Erica. Thank you for putting this together, and thank you everyone for coming. We are very excited about sharing this information and making sure that you're getting correct information that's coming from the faculty that are presenting. So anyway, let's get started with, here's the definition, and this comes from the International Literacy Association. They have a wonderful literacy glossary that you can access if you are concerned, questioning a term. The International Literacy Association has a wonderful glossary, like I said, and you can look up any of those terms, but it's defined as, it's a term that refers to a corpus of objective investigation and accurate, reliable evidence about how humans learn to read and how reading is taught. So that's the basic essence of that. So Erica, if you'll want to go ahead and flip that change, thank you. So it is research-based and evidence-based systems that inform our literacy instruction, but we want to make sure that this encompasses that multidisciplinary research. It comes from the field of psychology, from the field of education, linguistics, neuroscience, communication. So it's not just what some people might think of just literacy. It comes from all over the place, and how does our brain basically function? So it's explicit, systematic, and structured literacy instruction includes these components here: phonological awareness, phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary comprehension. And you've probably heard these terms floating around, particularly as it relates to the science of reading, looking at phonics and phonemic awareness. And we want to show you how that fits into the whole of the science of reading, and that phonics and phonemic awareness are not the science of reading. It is part of the whole. So go ahead and move that, Erica. I can't see on the bottom too, Erica, that like when my turn's up, but if you see my name on there, just boot me off. So anyway, it's based in seminal research that came out in the 80s under the Becoming Nation of Readers report that came out. Then there was the National Reading Panel that gave the recommendation of the Big Five, and we'll have that coming up talking about that. It was also known as the Pillars of Literacy. And those pillars of literacy, again, are phonics, phonemic awareness, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. So it's also rooted in the National Early Literacy Panel, the Reading Rote Model, and the Simple View of Reading. It's all of these things. So what you're hearing about the science of reading is not, as the research goes, really anything new. It was based in the Big Five, and it's based in the pillars of literacy. The moniker or the name has changed. So go ahead and move that to the next slide, Erica. Thank you. So based on this, plethora and this, decades of research, what has been concluded is that how do children learn to read? What goes wrong when children don't learn? And what kind of instruction is most likely to work best for most students? And that's a conclusion that MOTS came up with in 2020. So go ahead. There we go. So again, the big five, and I don't know if Tara was going to add anything to this, but those big five that came out of that seminal research was phonemic awareness. Sometimes it's called phonological awareness, although they're not really the same thing. Phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. What's getting the press right now is the phonics and phonemic awareness, but we really want you to understand that it's part of the big picture as it relates to reading. It is not. Phonics and phonemic awareness are not the science of reading. It's part of the big picture. I don't know, Tara, did you want to add something to that? Because I thought I saw your name on there.
Nope, I'm good.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
So go ahead and move. Oh, go
And
ahead.
you're all welcome to chime in and add. So this is yes, this is a webinar. Yes, it is a call with many people. And also we can talk and chat freely too. So it's okay.
So go ahead and move to the next one there. So is this, I'm sorry.
This one's Lisa's.
Okay, good. So Lisa, take it away, Lisa.
We had a lot of conversation in our small group around this particular slide. And so I want to make it clear what this is getting at. There's a lot of debate about some of these terms and where they're interchangeable and where they meet different, address different things. One of the questions that Erica asked us was, how are we preparing students to engage with the science of reading? How are we making sure that they're ready for the field? And so what this is not necessarily the differences between balanced literacy, structured literacy, science of reading. It's what perceptions are. And sometimes perceptions are accurate, and sometimes, as we know, they are not. So the perception of current literacy practice or balanced literacy is that it focuses very heavily on a workshop style of teaching. Workshops are typically either individualized or they're small groups based on common need or common ability. And so it doesn't necessarily provide for that systematic aspect of instruction that's very heavily emphasized in science of reading. Often decoding strategies that are taught through a workshop model might be based on the 3 cueing systems, which are graphophonic, semantic, and syntactic. Again, that's a perception that's not necessarily accurate. To a large degree, how a workshop is run is really dependent on the teacher and the teacher's training and the teacher's approach. But there's this belief that that's what's happening, and that's why there needs to be a shift in the model that is being adopted by the state. There's a belief that learning is natural, and it's not. So what we do know about learning to read is that you're trying to access a man-made system. English orthography was created by humans. It's not something that exists naturally. And because of that, accessing it is not an organic biological drive. There's an instructional component that needs to happen. There's also a heavy emphasis or belief that there is within this system of balanced literacy or balanced reading that it uses level text. And there's a lot of concern about leveling and the extent to which leveling provides valid and reliable information for teachers on matching text to readers and on matching instruction to student need. The biggest concern with the current perception is that balanced literacy is based on a wait to fail model, meaning that until students actually show signs of struggling, they don't actually get the support that they need. So instruction isn't tailored to their specific level of development. It's not designed to push every student forward in their reading development. It's really designed to provide generalized instruction that is not individualized or targeted until a child begins to fail. The degree to which things are true is really very place-based, situationally dependent. So to use this argument to say that we need to move to a different model fails to understand that balanced literacy isn't necessarily these things. It could be, it could also not be. And so what we want to get at is if these are perceptions that people are carrying forward, we want to address the extent to which they're accurate or not. Erica, do you want to move forward? So perceptions again of current literacy practice when you move from balanced literacy to structured literacy. Structured literacy is a very skills-based model to a large extent that's based on systematic instruction that's very explicit. So systematic meaning that you move from easier skills or easier content to more complicated skills or more complicated content as your foundation is more set. And explicit meaning that direction or instruction is very direct. So when you see this letter combination, this is how you say it. So AT is at if you see it at the end of a word. So very direct, very systematic. Multisensory is based on originally a lot of work that was done by Orton and Gillingham and others that say that when instruction addresses the four primary sensory modes, which are visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and tactile, you're more likely to create pathways, neural pathways that allow students to retrieve information and use it to support themselves with tricky text. And then really looking at the 5 blocks or the 5 pillars that Sharon mentioned, which are phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. In this particular case, emphasis is really put on scope and sequence. So moving from easier to harder or more simple to more complex, using a gradual release of responsibility model. So students would not be working independently with written text or working independently with reading until they had demonstrated readiness. So there's going to be more support, more scaffolding until students indicate readiness to move on. Feedback is immediate with a goal of skill-based mastery. So until students are able to demonstrate again that they've mastered whatever the skill instruction is, you're going to continue to give them guided corrective feedback until they do it. And again, these are perceptions, not necessarily reality. Language comprehension is built through content area literacy instruction. A lot of this was really heavily emphasized in Common Core. So if you look at the Common Core state standards and you looked at the shift around 3rd grade, a lot of literacy instruction moves from narrative to informational text around that grade level. And a lot of the skills of literacy, particularly in the areas of vocabulary and comprehension, really occur through science and social studies content. So it's an opportunity to see literacy as not existing in the discrete areas of just reading or language arts, but really something that is across the entire academic curriculum. You have to access language, you have to access text, you have to be able to create text to learn. And that's true regardless of what content area you're in. And that the emphasis here is on decodable text, meaning things that are phonetically regular and rich literature. In this case, you're using a prevention-based approach and not an intervention approach. So prevention-based means that you're working with kids who are in the general population, not necessarily experiencing struggle, to keep them where they should be with reading development so that intervention isn't necessary. Just like in the prior slides, these are perceptions. We're not saying these things are true, but part of the reason that this model is particularly attractive in some cases for some people is because there's a little bit more control with it in terms of what your students are learning and what your outcomes will be. And that's because of its systematic, explicit nature. Erica? I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Bethany. I just want to stress, and again, any of my colleagues who want to jump in, please do, that there's a difference between saying these are perceptions and this is what these models look like in every classroom where they're adopted and implemented. We simply want you to recognize when you hear these things, and you might, as justifications for decision making, that these are generalizations that people carry forward and they're not always 100% accurate. Bethany.
Thank you very much, Lisa. That was a really good explanation about both balanced literacy and structured literacy. And so I just have a couple of slides to discuss 2 theoretical models that are grounded in both that talk about how children learn how to read. So next slide. So this is the simple view of reading. I say they're grounded in both, but this is a model that is very popular, in particular with the science of reading. It's because it is a very simple view of explaining what it takes for a child to be able to comprehend what they read. There are 2 parts to this equation, and one side is decoding, which is word recognition, the ability to lift print off the page. And the other part of this equation is language comprehension. So being able to actually understand the words, the vocabulary, the syntax, the semantics And both those things are necessary. You might have been familiar with a student that could decode like crazy, could lift every word off the page, knew all of their high frequency words. But if you ask them, well, what was that about? Maybe they were lacking the vocabulary, the understanding, or they've never heard that word before. And that part has everything to do with language comprehension, background knowledge, what students understand about the world or topics that they have or have not learned about quite yet. And both sides of that equation are necessary in order for a student to comprehend what they're reading. And if you wanted to actually go into math, you can consider if either side is 0 or less than 1, then reading comprehension on the other side will also not be whole or 1 as well. And next slide. So this is Scarborough's reading rope, which is a visual metaphor, which that's what Dr. Scarborough likes to call it. But it essentially breaks down the simple view of reading into the complex strands that go into both word recognition and language comprehension. And as you can see below, for word recognition, you'll see phonological awareness, decoding, and word recognition. Those things are found in the big 5, or the 5 components of reading. And then if you look at language comprehension, you see background knowledge, vocabulary, etc. All of these strands are necessary. Something that might be missing, you'll notice, is fluency from the big 5. If we're still talking about the big 5, fluency is also often found in the strands of word recognition coming together, as well as language comprehension, understanding of vocabulary. And then finally, skilled reading is comprehension, the end goal of reading instruction for a student to be able to understand what they're reading. And as you can see, it is very complex. These strands are interwoven, they support each other, they build off of each other. Language comprehension becomes increasingly strategic, and word recognition becomes increasingly automatic. And so the science of reading in particular puts an emphasis on word recognition, but it does not discount language comprehension, because language comprehension is also just as important. And same with balanced literacy. As you see, a lot of these things that balanced literacy is grounded in is also found in these strands. Thank you, Dr. Hernandez-Scott. You can go on. And so Tara and Matt, if you can both talk about structured literacy. So what does it look like? How do we support students in learning how to read?
Let me go, Matt. I can't see Matt. This graphic just kind of talks about similar to the reading rope. We talk about structured literacy. We're really talking about evidence-based approaches to literacy instruction that includes explicit. Lisa Laurier talked about that, systematic instruction that includes the foundational skills of reading, writing, and language. And so this is really just another visual of what Bethany just talked about. One of the pieces that Lisa touched on a bit is we talk a lot about the systematic approach, that things are taught in an order or a system, and a lot of it is to avoid confusion and decoding. But the approach is also cumulative in nature. And so there's a lot of assessment that goes on in the learning. Is when we talk about mastery learning, we really don't want to move on until students have learned some of the skills and strategies. So as to avoid some confusion. And I always say it's like climbing a step. And if you don't get one of the steps, the students have to step 2 or 3. So it's really important that each step of the way is taught, so children don't have to make a big leap as they learn. Next slide.
And Tara, can I add on one thing? Something to consider specifically with structured literacy is just the idea, and Lisa had mentioned it before, that learning to read is not a natural process. Kids don't just look at a book and with osmosis understand print. It is very complex. And so that's why you were saying structured, systematic, every single piece of the puzzle, as if it's a staircase. And if every student gets every single piece of the stair, they will be able to successfully break the code of print. Thank you, Tara. I just wanted to add that.
And I just wanted to add to that, reiterate that it's not an innate human behavior to learn to read. It's amazing that we're able to do that in the first place. But also too is that while learning those skills specifically are necessary to go up the steps, there's still all this other stuff that's going on. And that's where, comprehension happens. It's really a fallacy in thinking that you have to do all of this phonics work before you can move on to comprehension. Because if you look at a brand new baby, that baby is comprehending from day one. If I cry, I get this. If this happens, I get this. I can understand stories that are being read to me before I even am able to read. And so it's really, while some of it might be step by step, it's all encompassing and it's all very messy. That process of learning to read, it's recursive, and I want to have everybody remember that, and that we base it in oral language too. That if we haven't ever said it, we're not ever going to read it because we don't have that innate into us yet. So
one thing I might, oh, sorry, Sharon.
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, one thing I might add too is that the advocates of structured literacy really see modes of instruction like interactive read alouds as one of the best demonstrations that a teacher can provide of some of the things that we want young readers to step into eventually. So things like listening comprehension, fluency, vocabulary development, the development of background knowledge, all of those are modeled and practiced and engaged in at the language level through our interactive read alouds. And so one of the earlier slides dealt with or really focused on the idea that children are reading texts that are appropriate to them and that they can decode. And they are also working with rich texts in ways like interactive read aloud, so that they are having access to much more than they are able to access when they're just decoding books.
And I just want to share one more metaphor for people to think about. My husband is a golfer, and I always use this. He can go out and practice his chip shots all he wants, but if he only practices his chip shots, he never gets better at golf. So you can go and practice all those parts, but you got to get in the game. And that's where that connected reading with that interactive reading happens. We can practice all of these skills type thing, but if we aren't giving our students opportunities to read connected text over periods of time, it's really difficult to get any better at that. Mm-hmm. So,
and I think you all are doing also providing just a concrete example of how learning to teach is both art and science, that there are certain scientific things that this is clearly telling us we should do. And then there's also knowledge of the student and knowledge of the context and knowledge of approaches that create artistry around that. Because there is no one way.
Eric, I think you froze.
No. Ooh. Can you hear me now? No? Maybe? Well, all right. So I will stop talking. This is a lovely set of resources. You'll see them inside. We'll make these slides available to those of you who attended as a PDF, but there is a resource folder that has a number of resources. I think there's like a reference list. There's a bunch of things that Bethany prepared along with samples of student work from some of their projects. So I encourage you to have an opportunity to take a look and see what is there. So now we will move on to, okay, well, let's talk about the current state. So that's some background knowledge around the science of reading. In our current state, we asked a couple of questions. How do preparation programs already address the components of the science of reading? And how do we know if teacher candidates are effective at a literacy instruction? Like really those are some critically important things. And now I think this is going to be handed off to both Matt and Tara. I'm not sure who's going first.
Matt, do you want me to start? Or do you want
Tara?
our prep program understands we all understand the importance of the science of reading. And we work really hard to ensure that the candidates are equipped with knowledge and strategies related to all of the components of the science of reading. We include science of reading on our coursework and methods courses and make sure they're aligned with evidence-based practices. We align our curriculum to the PESB competencies, and the competencies do encompass the science of reading and structured literacy. There are plans, and Eric, I don't know if you want to address this, or Bethany, about updating the competencies. Over the past few years, we aligned to the national competencies, and so our content test is aligned to those. Bethany, did you want to address the RCW?
Yeah, I'd love to. So currently, the idea is that we have the reading standards, which were written in 2011, and there were some ideas and some movement around revising them, but then COVID hit. But what is important to understand is that the competencies do need to be updated in order to support and stress dyslexia legislation in Washington State. Because, like, for example, the word multisensory is not included in the standards. And this is, I wouldn't say it's necessarily new, but it has been recently surfaced seminal research, which is all part of the science of reading movement. But just making sure that the legislation says that there needs to be evidence-based multisensory structured literacy interventions, and they must be provided by an educator trained in instructional methods, specifically targeting students' areas of weaknesses. And it's recommended that this happens in the general education classroom. So teachers need these skills. Teachers need to be able to do this. All teachers, every teacher need to be able to do this. And so that is something that needs to be added. And those standards need to be revised in order for teachers coming out of straight out of college to go into classrooms and be ready to tackle that. And that way, when teachers go into the classroom, they don't have to be retrained from their district or pay out of pocket for additional trainings, et cetera. Just already being prepared to at least meet this legislation, which is a requirement. Thank you, Tara.
Absolutely. And to add to that, thank you, Bethany, for like saying that so clearly and succinctly. One of the things that PESB wants to be able to do is to be able to, like, we engage in policy. We typically update things on a 7 to 10 year cycle. Research happens much faster than that. So these faculty members are doing more. They're doing exactly what they're supposed to, and PESB would like to keep up. So one of the things that we will be asking for, and we will find out if it will be approved for us to go forward, is to have increase in staffing so that we can update the endorsement competencies more often and have multiple groups running at a time, so that we don't have to wait until literacy is finished to start with math. We might actually have two things running at once. So thank you for that. Anything before I move away from that slide? Anything?
Just one more thing. Really, if you think of the candidates we get, our job is to prepare them in both knowledge and skills. So next slide.
Did I go too far?
Nope. I think that's the next slide for me. We talk about profession ready. We've been doing some research. My colleague Ann Van Wig and I actually on looking at the content assessment, and we came across this term profession ready in the literature, and so that's the term we have been using here at Eastern. And being profession ready means that candidates have the necessary background knowledge and skills to continue building on new knowledge. And it implies that candidates walk out of our doors as they complete with a good foundation, a solid foundation of knowledge that can be applied into real world teaching. And we talked about this a bit, so I'm going to go very quickly, but candidates get there through their coursework, learning content knowledge. We partner with the school districts to create opportunities for candidates to practice the cycle of instruction in their clinical field work and other opportunities. The other thing we like to do is partner with the school districts in a reciprocal manner. So we're learning from each other. And also to help ensure that our candidates are learning what is actually happening, current practices in the field. We talk about candidates as novice practitioners. So when they walk out the door, they are not expert practitioners. We try to get them solid foundation so they can grow into expert practitioners. And we emphasize in our programs that professional development, ongoing learning, ongoing professional development is very important once they get into the field. Because we know retention of teachers is a big has big effects on students. So I'm not going to go into too much more, but mentors are really, really critical to this piece of the puzzle. I think Matt might talk about that a little more, both during preparation, but into induction, into hiring and beyond. That mentor role is really important. So we take that seriously and we try to work closely with our mentors. Next slide, please. Yep.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to provide a quick snapshot of what it might look like in a methods course that is focused on early literacy and support of our young readers and writers. I teach a course at Western Washington University that's focused on literacy instruction for that band of students. And what we're trying to do in the course is build a foundation of understanding across an academic quarter that's focused on some of the conceptual frameworks that have been shared today and others, and that combination of theory, research, and practice. And then developing through course activities like course readings, discussions, video exemplars, classroom observations where we bring the class out to local schools, lectures, where we're unpacking aspects of some of these models, Scarborough's reading rope, and additional processes that we try to highlight, like cultural and other content knowledge, strategy use, motivation, and engagement, in addition to all of the other aspects that we've been learning about today. So next slide, please, Erica. And so the course is built on this teaching and learning cycle. It may be familiar to many of you because it's not just unique to literacy, but students in the course learn about and then engage in this cycle that starts with assessment, where they're gathering data focused on students' literacy understandings, and then they're analyzing that data and comparing it to literacy learning benchmarks and standards. And then they plan for instruction as they work with a partner student. We work with a pull-out program in our first literacy class. So students are taken out of the classroom to work with our teacher candidates, and our teacher candidates often also go in and support learning in the classroom. And then they teach lessons to their students and iteratively keep moving through this cycle as they go. And so this is the real focus of the course, is to embed all of this information focused on the best ways to meet students' needs and then to apply it in an authentic context. Next slide, please. And so the literacy course, and when it gets to the practicum part of it, when they're working with students, these slides are the photographs are actual students and children with whom we've worked with, and we've gotten permission to use these photographs. The candidates first begin by conducting a range of assessments with a partner student, and those assessments include focus on interest and motivation, listening comprehension, and vocabulary, and that's often gotten at through inquiries of the students and interactive read alouds and other approaches. Phonemic awareness assessment, we do a specific phonemic awareness assessment, phonics assessments for decoding and encoding, which is reading and their ability to represent the code in writing. They also engage in decoding inventories, and so we've moved away from the practice of running records. which is where we're trying to look at balanced cueing, but rather we're putting a primacy on visual cueing strategies, like being able to recognize letters and letter patterns, and then use illustrations and other cues sometimes to cross-check those understandings. And then students also engage in a writing analysis. And then after gathering this assessment data and also looking at assessment data that the district has gathered through the iReady assessments, students then plan and design lessons to meet the needs of their partner students. Next slide, please. And so what they do for the remainder of the quarter, this academic quarter, it's about a 10-week quarter, is they design 3 lessons to begin, again, using their assessment data, focused on phonemic awareness and phonics instruction, and it's systematic and aligned to what's happening in the classroom, with formative assessment throughout. So they are iteratively changing their lesson plans based on what they're learning. And sometimes they stay, for example, on lessons focused, say, on consonant digraphs, because that's where the students need to be. And then they design 3 lessons that build on that phonemic awareness and phonics development, and still include them, but bring in decodable texts. And we've tried to work with decodable texts that have high interest and high motivation, and those are sometimes hard to find. But we've been able to locate texts that really help to attend to students' interests and motivation, in addition to meeting their needs in terms of their readiness in decoding. And then they develop 2 writing strategy lessons that are also attending to some of the encoding of letter sound patterns, but also strategies that will support them as writers. And so what we're trying to have by the end of an academic quarter is a student who has a basic understanding of the real crucial and critical aspects of early literacy development that they can build on as they grow into further coursework, their student teaching experience, and then into the first years of instruction.
Sorry, can I add one thing to that? We do something really similar to Matt, and he and I have talked about this a little bit. And I think going along with that diagnostic component that is so critical is also understanding if a child, for example, were to present with deficient phonemic awareness, what are the most common reasons that would cause that to happen? So it's important that students are able not just to say, our candidates, not just to be able to say, this child is struggling with reading because they have insufficient, whatever it might be, but to be able to work backwards and figure out, is that environmental? Is that medical biological? Is that instructional? Where are the factors that cause that deficiency to occur? What led to that? So that as you're working with a student instructionally, whether you're doing that one-on-one in an intervention setting, or you're doing that in a whole class setting, you understand the factors that lead to either the development of these things or that create problems. And that's an important part of becoming a skilled teacher. So I think we're all doing that. And I think that's an important part of the science aspect of reading that Erica was talking about. It's that art and science. The science is really being able to understand where's that foundational piece that's so important. What's causing that?
Thank you, Lisa. So we also asked, when we talked about the science of reading, we discussed what is already occurring. We had a couple other questions. What else should be included as best practices for elementary literacy instruction, if anything? And what does the research say about literacy instruction for multilingual learners and for students with dyslexia? Like there is literacy, the nature of literacy must be, we must use strategies that we can apply to different kinds of students, including those who are acquiring English language and those who might have difficulties with reading. And so our literacy faculty put together some additional information here as well.
I think this is me. This is Anne from Eastern. I'm going to preface this just a little bit as a call to all education faculty, teacher preparation programs. We are not static. We are constantly learning, just like teachers constantly learn. We are in that same mode. So as I was reflecting on the science of reading, even before it became out in mass literature, I was attending conferences and having conversations about this 8 years ago, right? So we're in the continuum with all the teachers on what's coming, what do we need to be prepared for. It's an exciting time. I mean, anytime we can make a difference with children's reading ability, it's a great day, right? I also wanted to make a point. We've talked about science of reading, but we've also kind of looked at it from this deficit mode, but we also have children that I have worked with coming into kindergarten. I had a recent one that was reading at a 5th grade reading level. He didn't need science of reading. He needed vocabulary comprehension. Now there were some holes, and that's the part where when I was talking to the student teachers, I said, he doesn't have it all, but he decodes beautifully. He can recognize the words. As a teacher, what do you do to meet all his needs, right? You don't need to teach him the short A sound. He's got that. So some of this is this idea about multisyllabic words is a big focus. If anybody's familiar with Freddie Hebert's work, she will tell you that children, it's not that children can't read, they can't read big words. So we have more than just, while the science of reading is important, it goes beyond that. So decoding skills really need to move beyond that. And that includes our older students. I mean, we're talking about elementary here, but some of this next call, and Erica, I didn't put this on the slide, but we really need to talk about how do we build this into other programs. We talk about all programs, build fluency building activities, and we talk about how that looks like in the classroom. It's not just isolated, but really how do they implement it? What does it look like? And then again, the word parts, the morphology, reading so that it's a connected process. Learning to read is a continuum. It isn't, it doesn't just happen the same for everybody. So while we'd like every student to read proficiently, as by the No Child Left Behind, we saw that wasn't working in 2014 when all children are supposed to read proficiently. We know that's never going to happen, but we can get closer to that. And so we have to build these practices within our prep programs for teachers to be ready for the foundations that they can build the practice from, novice into experts. Okay, go ahead. So when we talk about meeting the needs of all students, Washington is beautiful. They are beautiful about leading the charge of how do we look beyond a narrow view of what the child is experiencing, but this cultural competency, diversity, equity, inclusion, multilingual, social emotional learning. Children can learn to read, but some children take longer to learn to read. So with our dyslexia children, or children with dyslexia, I'm going to say that correctly, it's not that they're not going to learn to read, but we need more explicit, more structured, more focused intervention, and it will happen. But we have to be prepared for slowing down the process to really build that foundation for them. But we also need to think about linguistics. Washington is a vast, we have many, many languages spoken in our schools. Cultural experiences, children that who have limited experiences beyond what happens just in their own world, if they don't have exposure to much, then their vocabulary and comprehension is affected. We know that. Children who have more, we've talked about that, greater language ability, learn to read and learn to comprehend quicker. Students identified with learning needs, we know that's a priority, but we need teachers who are in the profession to stay. When we lose teachers, we lose that knowledge and all that training that they've received. And finally, there's no magic pill. People want a quick fix. Learning to read is not a quick fix. As many have said, it's not a natural process for most. Some, we know it comes easier, but for most, there's no magic pill. It requires teachers who have expertise, knowledge, skills to pull all those together to really be able to meet the needs of students.
And can I add on that too? I also want to think too, when we talk about student characteristics, it's not always deficits, right? We want to think about the rich languages that students have and how we can incorporate that into our teaching. And so I just kind of wanted to also connect that sometimes when we think about the science of reading, we constantly think about what students don't have. And we want to try to flip that script in our mind to think about, oh, what do they have? And how can I incorporate those strengths into the instructional move and into the conversation when we're thinking about policy and practice when we're working with diverse students particularly.
Yep, beautiful. Yep, beautiful. Thanks, Margaret. And you know, it's also interesting. We have worked on research together, Margaret and I, but also we're in a literacy research association group that does it's a great think tank for teachers across the country. And we would like to invite teachers to join this organization. This shouldn't just be us working in isolation. If you are interested, please let us know. It is a fabulous conference. It's one of my favorite ones. Margaret's like, yeah, it really is. But please join us. We want what you're doing in schools because we need your research. If it works and if it doesn't work, both. Okay, what else is on there?
To type and anxiously writing that down. So thank you everyone for visiting and being here today, especially in this late hour of the day, and especially a special thank you to Erica for allowing for us to participate in this. I recently came from Idaho, and I can tell you, just don't tell them I said this, they're not having these kinds of conversations on the state level with literacy educators. And so I just really value this experience. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you all for being here. So I had the easy task of working across these wonderful people who are on this panel, and I asked them to limit, okay, so this was a really hard task, limit and give us just 1 to 2 assignments that connect to the Washington ELA standards and elementary ed standards, and then how those connect with the science of reading elements. I think there's sort of this misunderstanding perhaps that we're distant from doing the science of reading when really our work is foundational to the science of reading. Or I guess if you want to think about it, assignments that we do, like how Matt just shared, those are central. The science of reading is embedded throughout. And I think I can speak freely across all of us is that it always has been, right? It always will be, because those are those foundational elements of what we know about how to teach reading. And so I just wanted to kind of highlight this, that this was across the panelists. So, assignments that we have for our teacher candidates to do, ranging from read aloud assignments, those interactive experiences, excuse me, that Matt shared about, phonemic awareness lesson plans, fluency, comprehension, and vocabulary lesson plans, research papers that connect the deep knowledge of those research items that were shared previously. Students learn about those models and connect and how they think about it in practice. All kinds of demonstration of proficiency as well. You can see this curricular alignment that we do. And I just wanted to note that writing, we also teach writing, even though it's not necessarily considered a core element of the science of reading. And so just kind of wanted to put that in that parentheses, that we haven't even touched today to talk about the levels of writing awareness and the modes of writing that we do with our students that we know is connected deeply to reading and writing, right? We know that process. Maybe the next slide, please. That would be great, Erica. And so here's some additional ones. We look at really the impact on student learning. And I really love Matt's example, because in so many different ways, we all teach a course similar to that, where students do levels of assessment. Assessment is key, it's paramount. We look at that assessment and figure it and model to our students how to apply that to instructional practice. And honestly, it takes a real challenge to take theory, look at data, and apply it to practice. I know those of you who are administrators out there see that, and that you work with that, and you work with teachers of varying levels as well. But we get to see those novice teachers in that inception, and we see the struggle. And we just kind of wanted to highlight that assessment is core when we understand the science of reading and how it impacts children. And I also wanted to kind of notice as well, there was a comment in the earlier chat about the children's literature. And yes, we want to make sure that decodable texts are engaging, they're culturally responsive, they're connected to the students with whom we work. They need to be linguistically diverse, right? We need to ensure that we are meeting the specific students that we are working with in our communities. For instance, The communities here in Pullman are vastly different from communities all in the different regions in the state. So we don't want to make this assumption that it's that magic pill that Anne referred to, or that one size fits all, or the perfect method. There is no perfect method, right? Students are too diverse, communities are too diverse for something like that. So, and then we have this next slide, Erica, if we could. Share the last slide, I think it is. And so the International Dyslexia Association Knowledge and Practice Standards, we also included this in our column to kind of evidence, to show you some of the other assignments that we do with our students that really deeply connect to those standards, right? An evidence-based literacy instruction advocacy project, and you can see all of those science of reading elements that connect, as well as the IDA standards that connect as well. Word recognition and literacy development essays, along with comprehension and literacy development research essays that students do. Students learn deeply about those theories. They interpret, they apply to the science of reading elements, but also to their practice. We don't make up assignments, right? We go to the standards, much like teachers, right? We look at those standards, we look at the International Dyslexia Standards, and we look to see how our program can be strengthened through those standards. What can we meet? What can we do in our actual communities to make sure that we're also addressing the cultural and linguistic needs in the communities we have? I think there's one more slide for me, or maybe it's a little bit later, right? And so I think one of the things where we were asked too is, how do we engage teacher candidates in the science of reading? And I put a little seed out there in the chats a bit earlier about this role of adaptive instruction, right? So we can't just do a one size fits all approach. There's no one magic curriculum, okay? I know, as you know, right, we can't have, we need to sort of address this ability for students and the candidates with whom we work to be adaptive and flexible to support the culturally and linguistically diverse students that they have in their communities. The community and school partnerships, it's vastly different. Those relationships are different and unique, and we have to really be aware of how those are. And when we engage in conversations about how to apply the science of reading. And I think I wanted to just leave us with this last kind of, thing, that this research, this pivotal research that guides me daily. I think I read this article, I read this work pretty much daily in the work that I do, especially now with the conversation about the science of reading. So Presley and colleagues, they looked at exemplary first and fourth grade teachers all across the US, and they found that adaptability was an essential component of teachers who were effective reading teachers. And so effective literacy research identifies that we have to have adaptive and flexible instruction. One size isn't going to fit it. One curriculum isn't going to fit it. And so I just put a word of caution out there, that one instructional training program, some states are not forcing, but highly suggesting or making, or I don't know what another good word would be, encouraging highly teachers in states to receive a specific training in the hopes that that would solve all the problems of our students in terms of their reading and their reading abilities. And that's not going to necessarily work, right? We need to develop and build the content knowledge, the pedagogical knowledge, but we also need to have that adaptive and flexible mindset as well. That was all my contribution, I think, to that part of it. Thanks, Erica.
Thank you. And I know, Anne, were you working with Belinda about these resources?
We did. Go ahead. And so all we're sharing with you is that as we in teacher preparation programs look to research to build what we're doing within our classes. And that goes back to that idea of using the National Centers for Literacy Research, What Works Clearinghouse, the National Academies. We are not working in isolation, is what we're wanting to tell you. That we talk about the practices that they see should all have foundations in research. It's not just what do you think works, what do we know works or doesn't work. Okay, go ahead. And this was, Belinda added this in, that some of these resources, and if somebody can jump in here, give us guidelines to use in our classrooms as needed. We work to, refine, and I tell my students every time I teach, something happens a little bit different. It's never the same class, but we use the tools that are out there for us to help improve our practice. And so this is just some examples of some. The next slide. Again, these are just some books that we are using. So if you had some questions about this, these are things that are being commonly used. These are ones Belinda's using. Somebody else might use a different book. I actually don't use a book. Oops, I use I use the research and current articles that are published. Okay, next slide. And then also Belinda is teaching, she has a heavy emphasis in ELL. And so this is some of the things she's using, promoting ed success for children and youth learning English. Wonder if that was it. Yep.
Yes, it was. And now we want to talk about our future state. So here, and then I'm going to stop sharing for a moment so we can see all the faces at once. You can hear from what we've heard so far that these faculty are knowledgeable. They care deeply about making sure that students are able to learn how to read. We also know that reading instruction doesn't occur in isolation, which is why we've had some discussion around, like, are we including the right things for students with reading difficulties for dyslexia? Are we considering adding components that have to do with learning the English language and language acquisition? Those were things that we discussed. And so if we're thinking about, well, where do we want to go in the future? Where do we hope to go in the future? Big question, what can support continuity, consistency, and coherence across programs? So if you were reading the chat, there we discussed the things that programs have in common, but there are some things that they are doing differently. Do we want to have more continuity, consistency, and coherence? That's a question I present to the faculty. See, I think I'm clicking the wrong spot. How do we align pre-service and in-service literacy instruction? So we heard a lot of discussion about, at least two people said something in the course of this meeting that we need teachers to stay. And one of the reasons why there is a leaky pathway between pre-service and in-service is when there isn't strong enough alignment between how one is prepared to facilitate literacy instruction and then what one is required to do once they're in the classroom. How do we navigate that? And then what would you hope to see from PESB? We have work to do. So we are the ones responsible for regulating, holding you accountable, and also supporting you. What would you like to see from us? We know one of our contributions is to make a request to have a deep dive into redeveloping those reading competencies so we can add the science of reading, needs for dyslexia, crosswalking with special education. And then you also have an opportunity to share some thoughts with the legislative members and staff who are here. So I'm going to stop sharing and ask you to let us know what you think. What do you think is going to help us move from a collection of programs to a system that has enough similarity to have predictable outcomes, but not so cookie cutter that you can address the unique needs of your location and the students in front of you?
Are you asking the panelists, Erica?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
wait, can you repeat the question?
Yes. So first question was, what can we do to support continuity, consistency, and coherence across programs?
Well,
What would you need from us and or the legislature to help you do that?
You know, much like teachers in the classroom, I think time and space and funds to come together, work on the standards, make sure the standards reflect the science of reading, and also alignment to our programs to ensure that we're all, you know, much, you know, to just do a deeper dive into the curricular realignment that I think is needed to ensure that we're staying relevant, making sure that we're up to date. Someone, you know, I think that just also being a bit of a new perspective in the Washington State. I think that in terms of providing that, and also providing research, right, for us to look at the impact of this work in schools with kids in our programs, to do follow through research on, you know, what teachers are learning and how that translates to first year, second years throughout their teaching. I think that might be a good next step.
Mm-hmm. So for example, on the spot, here's an idea. So we have faculty fellows that have been awarded grants this year, and the purpose of those grants is to do research on their programs and follow graduates in the field to see how aligned their work is. So the next iteration of the faculty fellows could focus specifically on literacy faculty and alignment of literacy practices from pre-service to in-service. That's an example of a concrete idea that we could move forward on. Any other thoughts about what could help there be continuity, consistency, coherence? Yes, Tara.
I really would like to see us partnering with the school districts and the more intentionally partnering on this. So just to make sure there's continuity. I love what Margaret said about the time and the space to make sure that we are kind of I don't want to use the word standardized, but I'm going to aligned and have a common understanding. But really the partnering with the school districts is so important to me, just to make sure that we are seeing those candidates into their induction and retention.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that we did when I was in Kansas City was there was an expectation that our candidates could demonstrate that they could improve student learning and literacy. So we could, using the school-based reading assessments, demonstrate that their partnership with us was value added for them. And that made them want us to be more involved in the school, because they're like, hey, our kids' reading scores are going up because you're here helping. And that gave our candidates increased efficacy in knowing that they could actually teach kids how to read, because they had to prove it before they could graduate.
Erica, another idea is that there's been money for ELL training at the undergrad level, special ed, you know, to encourage people to pick those up as majors or minors, or as that other endorsement. And frankly, reading and literacy got left behind on that. For the most part, undergraduates are not encouraged to pick that up as an extra endorsement. And I found out this last year that Central Washington right now, we're the only university, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, who has that endorsement only that practicing teachers can come back and pick up. And I had emailed some of the other universities because I was looking for a class for someone who missed it in our cycle, and they said, oh, we don't have our reading endorsement anymore. So I mean, frankly, reading got left behind, and I'm not saying that we don't need, you know, because we do need teachers trained in bilingual ELL, and we do need teachers trained in special education, but reading has to be brought back up in that undergraduate program, so more specialized than what they get as a just in their elementary ed program.
And perhaps with redeveloped reading competencies that are more comprehensive and more connected to other things, that might become more attractive. Okay, I see Matt, Bethany, and then Allison.
Yeah, my thought is sort of builds on what Tara was noting about partnerships with school districts. And this is sort of a bigger picture item, but I think the more that we in our teacher preparation programs can move toward residencies and a residency model, the better it will be for everybody involved in this enterprise. And that means situating our coursework in schools in partnership with our districts. It means adopting models like co-teaching so that our students are learning right alongside their cooperating teachers and actually teaching students in the classroom. So in some ways, my mind goes to those larger systemic changes that I'm kind of excited about, that there's some movement in that direction in the state right now, because I think it just makes the work that we do much more impactful when we can be working in the districts where our students are going to be both student teaching and getting their first teaching positions and moving through the induction process.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Bethany, and then Allison.
Yeah, just to address your earlier comment about like what we need as educator prep programs moving forward. I think if we have the time, the space, and the ability to meet together again, North Carolina, for example, has a task force. I'll put a link in the chat of 31 teacher prep programs that have gotten together to completely overhaul whatever they needed to change with support from each other without being siloed, without being separated, without, like someone had mentioned, we kind of keep our rubrics and syllabi to ourselves. But if the idea is to make sure that we train future teachers to walk into the classroom ready, then I think we really need to work together. And this is honestly the first time working with this group. It's been amazing. I've met with them a couple of times, but I would love the ability to continue doing this, to work with each other, to support each other, to learn from each other, all in the best interest of teachers that are serving our students. And every single one of them needs to learn how to read.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the nerd in me has been really really excited by this, because there is such power in seeing you all come together and like, what's the word? The enthusiasm that you all have generated in each other has been generative for me as well. Allison.
And can I
Thank
mention, I
you.
said North Carolina, but Mississippi is also doing a lot of great work. If you want to look at what they're doing in universities, that's another good example. I'm so sorry, Allison. Go ahead.
No worries. So I love this idea and just the energy. And, I keep thinking the people that are talking here, literacy faculty, we have the tools, we have the knowledge base, we're doing the research. Like there's a lot happening that is absolutely what we need to do to move forward and to make sure that every pre-service teacher leaves prepared with high efficacy to teach children how to read. But we also have a lot of constraints, right? Just like classroom teachers, like there's only so much time we have built into our programs. And so one of the things that I was mulling over is that in addition to looking at the competencies, the reading competencies, revising them, collaborating on how to meet them, we need to look at the whole package, because we have requirements layered, like requirement layered on top of requirement on top of requirement. And there's only so much time. I teach in a small program, and so we're resource strapped in terms of how much time I have to work with my candidates. So I think kind of a holistic look at the rest of the pie, the whole package of what we're expecting preparation programs to do, and then really identifying the resources and the resources and the supports that's necessary, time being one of them, to make sure that can happen.
All right. It is
I also have to say, I'm also nerding out too. I'm like scribbling on my notepad of people I want to get their research and the articles that they've written. So it's been a great conversation.
And so last question. And if for all of you who are listening, we're going to like capture the recording. I'm pretty sure my chat auto saves at the end of any meeting, so we'll be able to share everything with you. Um, but folks here, our panelists, uh, last question. What would you like the audience, Washington educators, students, families, legislators, legislative staff, PESB board members, PESB staff, our partners and stakeholders, what would you like them to know about the state of literacy education in Washington?
I'm going to jump in here. I just think to just take a moment to thank teachers, to thank school faculty, to thank administrators for the hard work that they're doing and the work that they continue to do daily. We get the luxury of thinking about this in a different way. I mean, we're not necessarily on the ground all the time. We're in schools, but I think just a gigantic thank you to the hard work that I'm just so in awe of the teachers and also the work that you do, Erica, and moving us forward, and the legislators, and how just a gigantic thank you in this process, and also just the continual work that you're leading us and doing.
I'm just, and we're willing to participate. So I'm not doing anything but giving you time, space, and opportunity. I appreciate you.
I definitely agree with Margaret. And just something to hear for all stakeholders is our NAEP data is very telling. And in order to make a change for our students, it's going to take system-wide change, not just in teacher prep programs, district level. It's going to take every single high-level stakeholder to make a change for our students. We all have to work together. And here we are as teacher prep talking and starting that conversation. But I think the idea is that there are so many things that need to change. It feels like it's moving a mountain, but it doesn't need to feel that way if we're all working together towards this one purpose. So I'm really glad that we're starting this conversation, and I hope we continue to work. And I'm seeing in the chat that ESD is thinking about talking with higher ed, but talking with districts. Like, these are the kinds of things we need. And I hope this conversation starts more conversations.
Absolutely. I would love to have a I don't know if it's a task force, but definitely a group of people across the ecosystem who are working together on a common problem and who are comfortable, like, coming together, giving up individual autonomy in order to have greater outcomes for all of us. I really think that's what it's going to take. And that's like state board, OSPI, unions, ESDs, faculty, families. Families have their own literacy practices. We just don't value them nearly enough. Like, all of us coming together. Other thoughts?
Erica, there are a ton of great questions in the chat. So I think I would love to just gather with folks and look and just read through those. So another meeting, just because they're great ideas and questions and thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will, so we'll share all of this information. We can have another smaller meeting, and we'll see if there are any legislators or legislative staff who were on the call today who would like to continue the discussion with us.
I also want to reiterate that, because there's some really great questions in there that we could continue to build professional development in this way based on the questions that people have.
Absolutely. And for those of you who are in the chat, just go into town with your fingers. Appreciate all of the questions and comments and what about this and what about that. Like, watching what you've been writing has been exciting, because it's generative, because it's thinking about what are we going to do next. And no one is satisfied with things exactly the way they are, but they're willing to come together to figure out how else they could be. So thank you for being here to support us with this discussion. I hope we will continue to be able to work through a comprehensive plan that will lead to not just better NAEP scores, but children and youth who love to read. I think that is a fine goal for all of us to have. So have a wonderful evening, and we will share all of the information with you soon. Have a wonderful day.